I'm Richard Hadlock, and I lived in this house for 4 years while I was teaching in the next door school. It's a one-room school on the Kashaya Reservation in Northern California. It was my first teaching job, so it was quite challenging to teach 8 grades in one room. My wife Ruth, who is a children's librarian, was helping out, especially organizing the little library we had. So it was that we started teaching in 1965 and stayed for 4 years. And the children virtually began to seem like our own kids because we were so involved in their education and their home life, and frequently they came to this house just to visit after school.
The ancestral homelands of the Kashaya Pomo are in present-day Sonoma County, starting at the rocky coast and continuing up through the lush forest for several miles. First contact with non-indigenous peoples occurred in 1811 when Russians established Fort Ross on the coast. After the Russians abandoned the fort, the area became known as Stewart's Point. In 1916, land was acquired as a reservation for the Kashaya Pomo and became Stewart's Point Kashaya Rancheria. It lies deep in the forested hills, 5 miles up from the California coast on the heavily wooded and winding Skaggs Springs Road. In the 1960s, the Kashaya Rancheria was an isolated hideaway with no running water and no phones. The village was home to about 20 families who lived in small wooden houses gathered near the roundhouse, the center of their indigenous religious life. Essie Parrish was a shaman and a spiritual leader of the Kashaya Pomo during the 1960s. She was known as a dreamer and a traditional healer as practiced in the native Bole Maru religion. Essie advocated for education for her people, as well as preservation of their native cultural traditions and language. She was also well known and respected as an expert basket maker.
I'm the daughter of Essie Nellie Pinola Fisk Parrish. Her famous thing was what she told you, know who you are. you're an Indian, and don't be ashamed to say you're Indian because it's great to be an Indian. I had to respect my mother's teaching. Like she used to say, one of the things you need to do is learn your language, learn your history, learn your genealogy, learn about the culture.
Essie was very skilled in the art of traditional basket making. The intricate baskets were woven from woolly sedgegrass and bulrush roots, redwood bark, and willow and redbud branches. In her demonstration, Essie and her helpers first gathered sedge roots. She takes care not to damage the roots, often using a traditional wooden digging stick. After gathering, roots would be soaked for 2 days and then aged for 2 months. Next, the roots were groomed and smoothed. Essie often used her teeth in the process. Traditionally, the baskets were used for cooking, gathering and storing food, trapping fish or animals, as toys, cradles, and gifts, and for ceremonies. Finally, the basket is started with a knot, each knot fashioned in a style unique to the basket maker. After weaving, baskets are decorated with beads, quills, shells, and feathers.
I remember Mom telling me, learn about your religion. And I'm so happy to see these familiar faces.
This is our meal, welcome in the spring. It's our law of reciprocity so that we can gather berries and things from the land, and we do our 4 nights of praying and show our thankfulness for the things that are put on this land for us to gather, and all of those things we remember at this time.
Thank you, you young people. I would say learn about your history, learn about your culture, learn about your religion. Oh, ya ke khamse du majihen ishkan, ya ke ma'atol do, mi ke amacho shibawi, mi ke amacho choshuwea.
The first year, my wife Ruth, who is a children's librarian, was helping out. In the middle of that first year, she said, you know what's missing is a plan for the pre-first grade children right here. And maybe we can offer something in our kitchen, which is just behind this door. So we bought a table that would raise up for us and come down lower for the children. And I think we had half a dozen kids coming to begin a preschool. She also got very interested in getting a Head Start program going. So I'd like to introduce Ruth and let her tell the story.
What we saw was needed was a program to introduce the younger children and have them ready to start first grade. There was no program for children under the age of 6. The Head Start program nationwide was just in its infancy then. We decided that Head Start would be a wonderful thing for the children. I read up as much as I could on what the Head Start concept was all about, getting children ready to be successful in school, and we started a preschool in the house. This is where we started the preschool.
The Head Start program needed a building to house the preschool. Ruth and Richard worked tirelessly to receive federal funding. With lots of work by the Rancheria residents, the land was cleared and leveled. A septic system and piping were placed in the ground. And soon, a speed space building was delivered and erected on the site. Head Start required a phone to be installed in that building, but there was no phone lines on the reservation. Ruth spent hours on a payphone in the not-so-nearby town of Wallala, insisting that the local phone company install the phone lines. Finally, the phone lines were installed, and success! The Head Start preschool program was up and running.
It ran from about 10 in the morning until noon. We didn't have much, if any, equipment, a few sort of hand-me-down things, but we always had plenty of books for me to use to read to the children, many of whom did not have books at home and had very little exposure to the fun of reading. We did art projects, we played games, we occasionally went on little field trips down to the other end of the reservation, perhaps to gather acorns and to make acorn mush. We also wanted the Kashaya children to see how valuable their own traditions and their own culture were, and also for the non-Indian children who came into the program from the surrounding communities to see a very rich tradition. We wanted the parents to feel involved in both the Head Start culture and the local Native American California Indian culture. We had not only standard school-type meals, but meals where they ate local fish, acorn mush, apples from the remains of an apple orchard where we took the children to gather apples. We really tried to introduce the most interesting things, the things that would mean the most to young children. One of our field trips was to Fort Ross, where Russians had established an outpost. It was important to take the children to Fort Ross because the history of the Kashaya Indians and the Russians who built the beautiful fort that is such a tourist attraction today. There were warm relationships between some of the Russians and perhaps Aleuts who came down from Alaska, and some of the Indian women, some of whom went back actually to Russia. It was important, I think, for them to realize that it was not the isolated community that some might have thought, that it was a very rich culture with many strains, the Russian with the Aleut, as well as with the Kashaya Pomo people.
In 1968, Essie Parish was notified by the Bureau of Indian Affairs that an important visitor wanted to visit the reservation. That visitor was Senator Robert F. Kennedy. His helicopter landed at the rancheria, and Senator Kennedy was greeted by some 200 Indians, their neighbors, and the Kashaya tribal elders, which included Essie as spiritual leader and her husband, tribal chairman Sidney Parish. Senator Kennedy visited the one-room schoolhouse where he was mobbed by newspaper and television reporters.
Very difficult, and these children find it difficult. I think they said just one child that's graduated from high school in the last 50 years.
Does the treatment...
So that there are obviously fewer and fewer jobs for the unskilled and the untrained, so that these children will have a very difficult time unless they have the training and education. The situation's very unfortunate at the moment. It's not just a question of expenditure of funds, it's a question of the interest by the state and by the federal government in the Indians. And secondly, it's also going to be a major effort by the Indians themselves. No question that the Indians have been the ignored part of our population.
Afterwards, Senator Kennedy was escorted to the roundhouse where he was entertained with Kashaya Pomo dances, a feast of traditional acorn mush, and given one of Essie's baskets, which is now housed in the Smithsonian Museum. Tragedy struck the reservation on a few occasions. Richard and Ruth obtained funding for numerous field trips to sites meaningful to Native American culture throughout the states of California and Arizona. After creating a topographical model of the reservation, they took the school students to an airfield where they could take to the skies in an airplane and view the reservation from above. The pilots then thrilled the kids with an air show. Richard also arranged a few side trips that were purely meant for fun. Richard and Ruth's time on the reservation wasn't only lessons and studies. A favorite site on the Kashaya Reservation was called the Opening. Richard and Ruth left the reservation in 1969, full of memories of a special time and the lessons they learned.
This guy was way happy. He was doing it for the family.